in evaluating a proposal, and in the context of that proposal, it would be helpful to engage with the private vendors who are partnering with the town.
Yeah.
And the town requests this, and I don't mean you have to write it every single time, but I'm saying there's knowledge, so that it's not a matter of me sitting down with company X behind your back, essentially answering a bunch of questions, which could then be viewed potentially as me interfering with negotiations between the town and a private party, which would be wildly inappropriate for me to do.
Sure.
But there is a general knowledge of the issues, and there needs to be some engagement with the company to help them clarify questions, then that would be reasonable to do.
Great. We've got 3 companies. We can identify them to you. One of them you already know is Wired West. The other 2 gentlemen I think you have met, Chris Lynch from Matrix and Adam Chait from... okay, so we'll put this in writing, and that's...
There were an awful lot of asterisks next to what I said, though, right? I mean, it's supposed to be a live project with the town. It doesn't have to be, everything's not...
We haven't made our selection yet.
I'm saying, what I'm saying, though, there's an active process of deliberation going on by the town, and in the context of the town evaluating a proposal, there are questions that come up that are germane to be answered to help the town or the company work together to assess whether or not they should proceed.
Okay.
I'm saying this only because this is a topic that's been a hot topic of discussion at MBI for a while, and I'm utterly uninterested in blue sky conversations about how we proceed.
It's been an animated topic of discussion in Egremont as well. And so it's, I understand. I mean, it's, these are not people coming out of the dark just asking made-up questions. These are people whom we are actively discussing a relationship with. And all of them, including Wired West, have made extensive submissions and subjected themselves to lots and lots of questions, including lawyer questions in one case. And we'll tell you who they are. So if anybody else calls and says we're representing Egremont, you can say, if I can continue, would you like to? I have just 1 or 2 more questions. The build out. So MBI's support using Commonwealth tax dollars of the towns is not dependent on MBI doing the build out, right?
No.
Okay. So it's, and that's the $22 million tranche.
Correct.
So we have the $18 million still to, you've taken a policy decision. We'll probably come back to you on that if we make a non-Wired West decision. But the $22 million that's not a problem.
No, not for qualified projects.
Okay. And if we disagree about the quality assessment, if we really seriously disagree with you, which would not be something that a town would do lightly, but if we did, there is a resolution process in state government.
I suppose in the immediate one for us, I suppose you'd appeal to our board. I think beyond that,
okay.
Our board chair is the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. There's a designee from the Department of Revenue, the Commissioner is the designee from the Administration and Finance. I think through them it would undoubtedly be risen to the governor's attention.
I doubt. Okay.
Just saying. I mean, it's
I doubt it would ever. But I wanted to ask the question.
I'm sure if you were extraordinarily unhappy, there'd be easy ways for everyone to know about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're not a quiet bunch, but it's okay. And the final question I have is personal curiosity. Well, not personal, but it's we have Wired West and Matrix, and you seem to have adopted, or maybe you first adopted it and persuaded them, putting cable fiber on poles approach. We have another vendor who is making the suggestion that they can do it underground. And the attraction of doing it underground, forget technology, it's just the time and the cost of making all these applications to Verizon and National Grid. Could you comment on that? There must be a reason why you've...
Well, I mean, I'm not the technical person, or one of, actually a group of them now, but I'm not the technical person from our staff. When a conversation came up at a different town being Terringham, about doing something similar, I brought it back to the shop and said, is this something that should be done? We should be considering this more broadly or generally. The comment was made that I'm repeating, it's almost hearsay, right? I'm repeating secondhand something somebody, an expert said, which is a dangerous thing to do. But that there were many circumstances under which burying the cable wouldn't in fact be cheaper or easier because of the geotechnical conditions, and that across a broad network, there are neighborhoods. What I heard back was that there are neighborhoods or sections of towns in which that could absolutely be the cheapest and most appropriate way to do it. If you generalize across an entire project of the scope of multiple, I know you're just talking about Egremont, but of multiple towns, that could present significant challenges that would make it a less desirable option to do more generally.
But in principle, you don't have any problem with either approach.
Well, as a non-technical person,
I'm a non-technical.
No, I'm just saying, like, so I'm a policy and public servant. As a public servant, I have no objection to it, as long as it can hold. I mean, I assume the standards of the wear and tear and the durability of the asset and access to it for maintenance are all, comparable. So I don't have any.
Yeah.
I don't have any principled argument against it.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. I don't have any further questions. I think that was very helpful. Jeremiah?
Yes, please. You mentioned three overarching, I guess, conditions precedent to getting this going, and I think we've got one, which is the financial commitment. The policy deliberation, I guess, I think you may have said an expression of needs. And I may be asking you a question that has already been dealt with, which is, does our technology committee have to come up with a policy that you review prior to?
It's intended to be a little simpler than that. I mean, it's if you I'm going to use simpler language. If you make a decision about what kind of project you want, you just have to tell us.
Okay.
So I mean, if you're going to go with a public-private partnership, that would need to kick off then the question about what materials you want to submit, so we can review and then say, this makes sense to us. We'd like a couple answers for additional questions. Alternately, if you, I'm just going to step through it. If you were going to do one of these fiber wireless builds or some other sort of wireless solution, there's probably some technical study you need to undergo to actually understand whether that could work. We could actually probably help fund some of that if you needed it funded. But the point is, we need to figure out whether or not you could actually provide reliable quality service, that exceeded 10 megabits per second and got into the 20s in your town. So in other words, those are the sort of hurdles in that one.
Right.
And so there are towns like Warwick that are looking to do that, and Holly potentially in Middlefield. Royalston's in the middle of a project on that. If you're going with the so-called MBI, fiber to the home build, then we're going to need to then engage in discussions around design and contracting with you, and then that's colored by the question of whether you're a Wired West town or not, simply for the purposes that we intend to both sign contracts directly with towns that want to be part of this broader build, but don't know who their operator is going to be down the road. Could be Wired West, might not be Wired West. And then for towns that are actively part of Wired West and wish to go that direction for their governance, we're going to sign an agreement with Wired West, and Wired West is going to sign an agreement with the towns. And I say that not because those are exactly, I guess you call them conditions precedent, but rather it's important, it'd be helpful for us to know because it puts you into a different group in terms of how we're negotiating with parties and sending information. So if there's, if a town, and I'd say further, to take one step back from that, we've engaged with towns too, on sort of an ad hoc basis, that are sorting things out, and so they have questions and they haven't made a decision yet, and those questions fall into different buckets. Sometimes they are questions like, could we get help understanding the feasibility of fiber wireless? Another one could be, I don't really understand how you guys are going to manage this build. Could we sit down and understand better how you're planning on actually managing this thing? And so there are towns, Otis was in the other day talking to us, where they were spending a lot of time understanding how we're planning on doing things. And and then C, what we talked about earlier, that if there's a public-private partnership, that there may be questions that come up around, I don't know, just one question that came out earlier for another town was how and under what conditions they could mix local bond funds with a public project and whether it was legal to do or not, depending on who owned it and who operated it and managed it. And so we actually provided legal advice to the towns under those circumstances.
Who did you provide advice to in those circumstances?
We provided advice to the town of Princeton.
Princeton?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What did they ask you, to what extent they could use the funds to...
Well, they asked us to look at an agreement that they had been submitted by a private party to them.
Okay.
And they asked us to review it and provide any feedback or comments. And I mean, honestly, I wasn't involved in all the daily conversations, so I don't want to get the exact chain of custody wrong. But
just knowing where it is good enough.
But we had
seeing it actually a question and answer is going to give me a better.
Well, this is my
idea.
point. So the point is we had bond counsel, external bond counsel, review it. They had some comments. Those comments floated back to the town.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask just a quick question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Are we under a deadline to make a decision, or just the sooner the better it gets out?
Our stated policy at this point, which I think we're going to hold to unless we find out half the towns aren't going to meet it, and then we'll have to revisit it, because it's not statutory, it's just sort of a guidance, was that we'd like towns to make a decision by June 30th of this coming year, the end of the fiscal year. That would be our strong preference. Again, subject to what you said earlier, if there's reason that you're nervous about meeting that deadline, just pick up the phone and talk to us, and we'll see what we need to do.
I don't think that's going to be a problem at all.
Okay. So we don't need to actually enact any kind of policy or manifesto.
Oh, well, let me alter that.
Yeah.
Whatever expression of interest you have, you make a decision to go some direction. It'd be great if your select board took some sort of vote to that effect. But I'm just saying, it's not the Magna Carta, right? It's just your policy decision you're making. Because as I said earlier, it's important to us that we know. Actually, I'd say something that goes back to the question you had earlier. It's important to us to know where you are in the process, because where you are in the process is going to reflect how we respond to you. If you say you've taken a vote, or you've gone through some sort of process and you've adopted a particular approach, then that would trigger, I think probably, and by formal I don't mean Baroque formal. I just mean it would be a stepped process to get you to approval and signature. If you're still doing due diligence, then it's more likely to be, well, can we talk on Wednesday for a half an hour, and we'll go through your questions and we'll give you the best answers we can, or we'll seek out counsel and they'll give you advice on what we've learned. You know what I mean? So there's those different stages to it, different steps to it.
If I could just chime in, Bruce. The process we have right now is we formed an ad hoc technology committee. It's composed of 6 members of the town. They're reviewing the proposals. Ultimately, that committee is going to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen are going to do exactly that. They're going to take a vote.
Yep, that's perfect.
They're going to formalize the selection process. At whatever meeting they voted, they do the vote.
Perfect.
If the towns go with this, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but I guess the MBI fiber to home option. Who's doing the procurement package? Is state gonna do that, or the towns gonna the towns that to end up in a collaborative, are they gonna be putting that together?
For construction, we're gonna be, MBI, we'll be doing the procurements for design and engineering and for construction
Okay.
and equipment, and supply acquisition. And we will need to obviously jointly manage and provide insight into how the project's going and provide, there's gonna have to be a process for, that's why the contracts are important, right? We have to articulate roles in terms of how we.
Are there gonna be takings associated with that, or is it anticipated this is all gonna be along either Verizon's easements, or are we anticipating takings of any sort?
It's anticipated to be along existing rights of way.
Okay. The agreements with MBI. Have any towns entered agreements with you guys yet?
They haven't, none have executed. We have draft agreements we could share though.
Okay.
I should say.
Yeah. What did Leverett do?
Oh, I suppose we do have an executed agreement, you're right. I apologize, no, it's kind of funny because they're done, I wasn't even thinking of that. Although they're a bit of an odd duck because they went first, they essentially led first in doing their build. We provided assistance to them, but we didn't directly enable it.
Okay.
And so essentially, they were treated a bit differently in the sense that we documented a lot of the things that we would require of the project of them, including like how much money they had invested and what process that how they built it and the level of service quality and how the quality of their operations and MLP management. And in other words, a lot of the elements I described earlier around the quality of the project, the town's investment, their political commitment to it, and the sustainability of the operations. Those elements were all documented in our contracting with them, but they were done sort of toward the end of a project that was already underway, as opposed to here we're talking about kicking it off and having a resolution.
Leverett being the first to do this build-up had to have learned a lesson along the way. What was that lesson?
They learned a lot of lessons, actually. They learned a lot of lessons.
I guess we need to know what they are.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to, honestly, if it'd be helpful to towns, I'd be happy to try to convene some sort of forum or thing where members of Leverett and Holy Acid Electric is an MLP that helped them enormously to product manager. Happy to have them come out and talk with folks. Because my point is, I've talked to them a lot, so I could go on for 20 minutes of things they've told me they learned, but that wouldn't be a good use of your time right now, I don't think.
Well, the hard part, the difficulty at least I'm having is that it's at some level going to involve a public project that's funded by the state, funded by the town, but inexorably in the end is going to be to bring something that is in the normal course managed by a private company. And in this case, it's just not feasible or not enough interest for the private companies to extend this. So we're dancing into a new realm, so to speak. And the easiest approach, at least for me, as having done municipal law 15 years, would be to have someone who has the experience doing this to be the person managing it, because we don't do this. We just don't do it. I mean, luckily here in Egremont, you have people who are savvy to the technology and what the needs are going to be. A lot of these towns that I represent, I have 10 of them, don't have that type of informational resources. So it's going to be interesting going forward, but I guess we'll figure. And I even have Warwick, and I didn't know David wanted to go to satellite or whatever. They're looking at.
They're looking at LTE.
What is?
It's like your, I don't know that I'm, it's like your Verizon Wireless or AT&T cell phone.
Okay.
You're downloading video and
All
stuff like that.
Well, I obviously much more robust with plans like that.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that we've talked about doing, I think, in the next month and a half, I realize that we're getting to the end of the year now, but still is, our technical folks
That wanted to come out to the region
and meet with people and go over, their view of the bill, and what it would look like, and answer questions, some of which could be useful in terms of all the different directions, because it's only so many ways to run fiber, right? And you can even talk about doing a little bit different. If you want. That's one thing, and then the other one is frankly on MLP organization and sort of operating, how to think about operations, just to improve the dialogue. That's something that Wired West knows we've been banging on, trying to particularly, we've had people looking at different operating scenarios and how to think about operations in a way that hopefully could get better information on the table around what some of the risks are. I mean, just I can tell you from my look at it that this is not public yet, but I'm just telling you that it's interesting to me that looking at some towns that are very, very small, even ones that are in a good, and I'm not talking about Egremont, by the way, that are in a good tax position in terms of, or fiscal position in terms of borrowing. It's just fascinating when you look at really, really small towns, thinking about how you achieve break-even for operations on a single town basis without cooperating with your neighbor, find other sort of economies, can be
very, very challenging to do. It's an interesting thing, and Leverett is a great example of a town that is working right now, and they have a sufficient number of households, they have a good median income, they have good home values in the town, and they have an 82 or 83% take rate in that town. But the one caution I'd offer, and this may not be true of Egremont, but for some towns of the 44 that we're trying to partner with, I wouldn't use Leverett as a model, because sometimes the towns are going to have significantly lower incomes, and you know, the elasticity isn't there in terms of pricing necessarily. And 83% is virtually 100%. If you think about consumer tastes and attitudes and preferences, if you get 83% of anything for sales, that might as well be 100%, right? I mean, it's an enormously high percentage, and so you know, and I'm not saying throwing that out there as a negative or a positive. I'm actually saying is that I'm actually looking forward to sitting down with towns and just putting some information that we've gathered in front of you guys to chew on as you're thinking about this, because it's an important decision.
I don't have any more questions.
Yes.
A question which is sort of a little curve, totally different area. We have heard evidence that supposedly MBI has not been familiar with Wired West business plan and have not vetted it or looked at it. Can you give some information about that?
We have the business plan and operating model. We now have actually a copy of the operating agreement. We have looked at it. We've had an outside consultant analyze it, as well as obtain sort of third-party evaluation of it. And we're in the process of internally kicking the tires of that report and model. And we recognize, because we've heard this already, and as I was talking to members of our board today briefly, I apologize it's taken so long to get this review out. I know it's something that's of great interest to many communities. It's something that, as I said earlier when I was talking about what I'm hoping we can put out into as information that can improve the quality of debate and how people are wrestling with optimizing their operating choices, how Wired West continues to optimize its approach. We hope it'll be very useful. Our hope right now, and this is again I'm getting in trouble, Chris, because you know I tend to be very forthcoming. We've been talking about trying to schedule public meetings, before the end of the year, to get this information out to towns. And we really want to do that because also we know we owe it to you. But also, by the way, I'm kicking the tires because I don't want it doesn't matter what we find. We could find that, my goodness, this is the world's greatest business plan you've ever seen in your life, or we could find deficiencies that need to be remediated. If people start kicking through it and looking on page 8, page 9, and in the appendices and saying, well, you've transposed columns and this isn't the right figure here, then all of a sudden we'd end up being appropriately, I think, torn to shreds for not having kicked the tires of our consultants and made sure that everything was properly. So we don't want to do that forever, but we're wrapping that up now. Yes, sir.
I just, from this conversation, could I just play back what I think I'm understanding, and you tell me if I'm getting it right?
Okay.
There are potentially 3 ways that the town of Egremont might engage with MBI. One is, if we're part of the Wired West Regional Network, then it would be perhaps sort of indirectly through Wired West that we'd be working with you. A second is that you, if we're not part of Wired West, you nevertheless, MBI nevertheless could be the project manager and building contractor for our construction project. Mm-hmm. Or if we go with a private company that is prepared to do the construction project, you would help support the funding of that through the
Yes.
state grant.
I think that's absolutely perfectly stated.
Right. Well, thanks. Okay. How many towns are in the scope of the MBI work?
Well, the total universe is 44 towns.
Are those the same 44 towns that originally signed on to the Wired West consortium, or I'm not sure if I have the right vocabulary?
And my understanding is, Chris, you're making a facial expression.
Right, he did, yeah. No, actually, Jim, you probably can answer that best, but it's not the total 44.
The 44 towns that are current members include 50 towns that are partially cable towns. So they are obviously not players in this last mile.
So that's your 44.
That's
Our
correct.
44.
The question was, is all of our 44 your 44?
Oh, okay.
The answer is no,
Oh,
because 6 of those towns are partially
Okay.
cable
We have
towns.
44 as well. Ours is more of an empirical reality that there are 44. I mean, I'm not being very serious. There happen to be 44 towns that don't have broadband in Western Massachusetts, and our list is those 44 towns. It used to be 45. Leverett has it now. Now it's 44 towns. Yeah, exactly. And then there are other towns, we found 10 of them, that had gaps in coverage. There are towns that are served by broadband cable, in which there are gaps in coverage that drop them below the prevailing regional average of broadband availability. But you may or may not know that almost no town in the Commonwealth has 100% broadband availability. There's usually some gap somewhere in it. And so we're also interested in helping those towns expand their coverage as well.
And there are 5 towns that, of MBI's 44 that are unserved, that are not in Wired West. There is Mount Washington, Savoy, Florida, Monroe, and New Braintree that are currently not members of Wired West, but are unserved towns.
And Otis now too is.
And, yes,
Peterson.
and Peterson.
And is that simply because they did not elect to participate in Wired West?
None of those towns have passed the MLP legislation. so they weren't qualified to join an MLP cooperative.
That's true of Otis and
Alfred currently is a member of Wired West, although they haven't been participating, and Otis was a member and decided to pull out.